Hey guys, wanted to get Eric back on the channel for what we hope is going to be the biggest deep dive into what it takes to be successful at cold calling in 2025. I get a lot of requests from the audience for coaching and guidance on cold calling, and we got some exciting news to share. Partnered with Eric, wanted to get him on the channel today for this discussion. But Eric, thanks for being on.
Yeah, of course, man. And just for everyone's reference, there are timestamps below, and we're going to talk about 5 major things today. By the end, the goal is to give you an actionable script you can actually implement today if you are struggling with cold calls. Again, there's timestamps below, but I think what's often lost in a lot of the common advice is people come to the table with a solution. They make a YouTube video about here's the exact script or LinkedIn post. Instead, I think it's really important for us. The first thing we're going to talk about is our background and why we struggled as reps as well. I think that's really important. Also, Connor's going to give a lot of input on some of the best practices and common trainings that really set people up to fail today. Third, Connor and I both work with, at this point, thousands of reps in the industry. So we actually have feedback as to some of the most common things that reps in seat today are struggling with. Not to mention, we're still doing this. We're still making cold calls ourselves. 4, we're going to really deep dive into Connor's methodology. And really in this part is where we're going to start to really develop a script end to end for you. And 5, how to actually implement it today, just really getting deep into all of the ways you can implement this and not only have a quality script and cold call, but really dive deep into actually achieving this at scale. So it's one thing to have a good script, but if you're making 10 dials a day, that's not going to work. So anyway, my point being, a lot of you have asked for coaching from either of us. And last thing I'd say before we kick it off is we're really excited to announce Cold Call Mastery. We've actually created a community that not only has this in extreme depth with tons of guides, resources, tutorial videos, and everything on how to build your list and plan your territory and cold call at scale, but also a lot of you have asked for coaching directly from us, which is part of Cold Call Mastery, where once a week, we're going to do live calls with Connor, with myself, with the higher levels team. So if you guys are interested in that and direct live coaching beyond just this video, you can check out the description as well. But enough shilling, Connor. Let's dive into the agenda today. Maybe setting the stage. Yeah, maybe setting the stage for everyone. Like, talk a little bit about your background in cold calling and especially why you struggled early on, maybe coming into it maybe naively or just early on with no experience.
Yeah, so what I'll kick off saying to people watching is that I would put myself in the bottom 20% in terms of sales naturalness and cold call naturalness. Cold calling did not come naturally to me. So I've been in enterprise software sales for 7 years. It's the first job I ever had out of college was that entry-level SDR, BDR role, Fortune 50 company. I was going to be making tons of cold calls. I knew that. So like a lot of you, I'm sure, especially if you're on a channel like mine, which is still a pretty small niche channel on YouTube, you're probably ambitious. You're probably looking to get better. And that was me. I'd read all the books, Fanatical Prospecting, The Challenger Sale. I was showing up early, staying late, taking voracious notes in sales training, doing the mock role plays, listening to them. And I'm like, I was ready to explode. I'm like, I am going to crush it on day one. I was ready to be that rep to get the fastest results. And the exact opposite happened. I was the last rep on my team to book a meeting over the phone. It took a month and I practically had to beg a guy to get it done, because what I found was a lot of the stuff that was happening in that role play environment was completely different than when a real person whose day I just interrupted said hello. And I was used to the managers or whoever it was going along with whatever questions I asked and however I kicked off the call with my permission-based opener. And I asked, hey, do you have 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling? And they're like, no, I'm busy. Who is this? How'd you get my number? And I was like, whoa, I'm not prepared for this. This is not what it looked like in training. So I quickly came to the realization that what was being taught in training was not really how it was like in real life. And I could just feel that something was wrong because I was doing everything textbook the way it was taught to me in training. And I felt no better after a full month of cold calling than I did on day one. That was the worst part. Yes, I was getting no results. That part sucked, but it was also that I saw no path to improvement, or I couldn't identify areas to improve. It was because I was so overwhelmed on every cold call. Ask rightward directional question, then a leftward one for negative impact. Do I get permission? And I would generally get so worried about what do I say next or just keeping the conversation going that I couldn't even steer any of these calls into a meeting. So that was a big wake up call for me. I was following a lot of the commonly taught advice in sales enablement or LinkedIn sales gurus, the top YouTube videos, and just found that I was getting absolutely no results. So I figured out something was wrong. I had to figure out what that was. And that eventually led me to the framework that I'm sure we're going to cover in detail throughout this conversation. But that's kind of a bit about my beginning cold call experience. It was not how I had anticipated. And one more thing too, like a lot of you, maybe if you're in that situation, the question started popping in my head, is sales for me? About 4-6 weeks in, I was pretty close to saying, you know what, maybe I'm not cut out for this. But all I really needed was a better framework and a more realistic, simpler approach to cold calling.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that definitely resonates. I know, like, it's good. You know, I think a lot of when you first start, you've got to take in all the information you can, but it's really funny. Like we've actually worked with people that are absolutely crushing it and they're still looking for that next thing. Like the analogy that really hit with one person that was early on and having tons of success, they promoted from SDR to account executive in 10 months. Now they work at AWS, is like they kept looking for like the next book or the next methodology. And I was like, hey, like your ambition is good here, but at some point, like LeBron James is not learning a new jump shot technique at 36 years old when he's been in the league for 10 to 15 years. Like he's kind of got that down, and yeah, he's working on like perfecting what he already knows, but he's not looking for like a fundamentally different thing. And I totally relate where you're saying like you're looking for anything and everything, calendar sale, fanatical prospecting, all of these different books. Maybe transitioning now to, I would say, like focusing on that person who's new, right? Maybe they are hitting some of those common resources, whether it's YouTube, whether it's some of the famous books or whatever it might be, or even their manager who they are so young into their career, they don't know, doesn't really give good advice anymore. What are some of like the common best practices or things that you feel really led you astray when you were really trying to find your footing and even just get some consistency in the first place?
To simplify the process and put a repeatable structure in place. It's not about using all the latest and most advanced techniques. Sort of going off part of what we were just saying, a lot of the sales training that I see commonly taught out there, it's very what I would call right brains, and it's not process oriented or kind of left brained, which is how my mind works. And this is interesting because I'm sure you get this question all the time. I'm a super introverted or a left brain person. Is sales for me? I think the answer is yes, but a lot of the training is very right brained. It's things like, it's like ask permission, be positive, stand up, spread your arms, match their energy. And it's stuff that's like, okay, I hear it. That's cool. That makes sense. But then when I went to go make a cold call, how does that actually help me? I still freeze up the same way. And what I realized was I needed to put a repeatable structure in place so that I felt prepared on every cold call. Maybe I wasn't using all of the advanced techniques like permission-based openers and pattern interrupts and asking a series of well-targeted directional questions. You have to meet the reps where they're at. When someone's brand new to cold calling, you have to give them a starting point and a repeatable framework that's good enough and will get them results so that they feel confident and prepared, and then they will naturally start to adapt it over time. An analogy I use is think of like a weightlifter, like, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Do you think he would teach someone I don't know what his technique was. He probably had like 2-a-day splits with ISO movements, the most complex training program of all time because it met him where he was at. Do you think he would teach someone new to the gym the same thing? No, he would say, let's do some push-ups, some sit-ups, maybe some squats and some bench press, stuff that's going to get you going and get you 80% where you want to be. And then once you're there, then we can focus on adding a little more complexity and advanced techniques, if you want to call them that. It's the same way in cold calling, where a lot of these sales enablement people or the top YouTube people, they don't take into account they're teaching brand new people. So I see things on YouTube. It's like at your opener, you want to sound lost, and like people like to help out. So, hey, can you point me in the right direction? And they sound good when they do it because they've been doing it for decades a lot of time, and they have their tonality honed in. So what I tell new people is don't get caught up in all of that. Just because something sounds good when you watch it on a YouTube video or on LinkedIn or something, that doesn't mean it's going to sound good for you, because I hear a lot of this stuff and I'm like, wow, that sounded good. But if I tried to say the same exact thing, I would sound like an idiot, frankly. I would get blown off the phone. So what I realized was I had to dumb it down. If anyone's an Elon Musk fan, he has that principle. He calls it the algorithm, where basically whatever situation is in, he eliminates like 80% of the process. And he would prefer to cut too much before adding back in. I think cold calling is the same way. You want to from the very start, from the opening of the cold call, you want to reduce what I call variance. So I think permission-based openers and pattern interrupts, questions like, hey, did I catch you at a bad time? They open what I call variance. So I preach what I call an assumptive formality, which I'm sure we'll get into, where the goal is to just get a quick formality and then get right into the call. And then when I get into the call, I have the value statement framework where I tell them who I am, why I'm calling, what I want. And we can go on from there. But this way, I knew when the prospect said hello, I knew exactly how the first 30 to 45 seconds of that call were going to go. I knew exactly what I needed to do, where before I implemented a repeatable framework, that was what was slowing me down. I didn't know what to do. I was holding my breath, hoping they were hoping they had 30 seconds to talk, asking a couple questions, hoping they sounded interested to the point where I could then go for a meeting. So that's what I would say there is putting a simple, repeatable process in place, even if it doesn't leverage all the advanced techniques, is in most cases the best place to start. And then you can add a little bit of complexity and techniques that feel comfortable to you over time.
Nice. Yeah, and I'm just curious too. Obviously, we've worked with thousands of students at this point, just more kind of crowdsourcing from some of the biggest transformations we've seen. Is there anything else, or, I think you've touched on a lot of things, but whether it's confidence, obviously you kind of talked about more getting systematic and approach, and that's kind of the solution. But as you've worked with someone one-on-one, is there anything that you've kind of found or consistent themes, call it like deeper into their psyche, that you have to overcome with like lack of confidence, or, just not really feeling like they know exactly where to go? Does anything else come to mind?
Yeah, that's usually where I start. One thing is coaching into their head what the purpose of a cold call is, which is to sell time to book a meeting. Generally, if your KPIs are to book meetings and get opportunities, when we pick up the phone, our goal is to essentially convince the prospect in their head, a lot of times it's subconscious, that we may be worth spending more of their time with. But a lot of reps overcomplicate this, and I absolutely did this when I was new. I worked at a huge company that had 100 products. I'm like, I barely know what we do or what we sell. And I had imposter syndrome. I was calling CFOs and CTOs, people who'd been in this industry 30 years. And I'm like, I don't know enough to provide value to you. And I felt like I had to sell my solution to them. But in reality, I just had to give off just enough value and just enough context as to how we could potentially be a valuable resource to them going forward. And that is a big mindset shift for a lot of reps. I'm not big on the rah, watch a motivational video, that can work for a morning. I think a lot of what slows people down and causes anxiety is that's the area. They feel like they're responsible for selling their full solution or platform on a cold call, when that's not what you're doing. You're selling a meeting, you're selling time. That's a far more manageable task. And guess what? If you're not even able to sell a 20-minute meeting on their calendar, you're probably not selling the value of like a new financial management solution or whatever you sell. So that's one. And then the other area, the quickest hitting path to getting better results that I look for, and again, this comes out in tonality and confidence, is what I call passive language and replacing it with assumptive language, and also assumptive tone. And assumptive tone generally has a downward inflecting tonality to it, where passive has an upward inflecting tone. So that's one of the first areas I look, is even things as simple as the rep might be running a pretty good cold call, and then they finish with, great, and if you're interested, or if you possibly have time next week, I'd love to set up a quick chat to introduce you to my team and see how we can act as a resource. And it's subconscious. Again, a lot of this is subconscious, but in the prospect's head, now the path of least resistance, it's easy for them to say, no, you can just, why don't you just shoot me an email and I'll circulate it to my team and we'll reach back out if it's of interest. Where if you would just run that same call exactly as is, don't worry about changing anything yet, but finish that with, great, yeah, I'm looking to set up some time this week just to get introduced and aligned with your priorities going forward. How's your calendar look on Wednesday or Thursday? So it had that downward inflection, and I'm looking to set some time, as opposed to if you're interested or if you're possibly free. So this is something I actually talk about in Cold Call Mastery, and I created a full checklist of passive language versus assumptive language. I tell people to listen to their calls. Even if they can get the transcripts to them, you can usually highlight and reference that passive language checklist. That is the quickest. I have coached so many reps and listen to thousands of cold calls. There's so many ways to improve your cold calling. That is by far the fastest ROI, is replacing your passive language with assumptive language. But it starts with confidence and actually understanding that, one, you're selling basically a meeting here, you're selling time, and that you're a valuable resource to these people. This is going to be a good use of their time. And then a lot of times the assumptive tone and the assumptive language starts to naturally come out of the reps when they understand that.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's funny. I think a lot of this is, a lot of people are excited to get into sales. Some of it is maybe what you see, you see not the whole thing of Wolf of Wall Street, but you see the typical salesperson that's portrayed on YouTube or in movies or whatever it is they're kind of excited. There's prominent influencers I won't publicly mention that tend to put a lot of hype and excitement around like their little videos about how to cold call. And I think a lot of that's bullshit, to where if you are calling highly influential people, actually being super pointed is refreshing and something that a lot of people aren't. Like, the average person is not on the ball. The average person is not telling it to you like it is. And I think, especially again, if you're calling up the chain, or really anyone in general, as we've seen, like actually being on the ball, whether or not that leads to a meeting, it generally makes them take you more serious and take more calls. It's a good transition too to the actual kind of framework. I know we've talked a lot about, some of the mentality, some of the more philosophical things here, maybe getting a little bit more tactical into the actual methodology, maybe kind of lay it out end to end, and we can start to pick it apart for people watching.
Yeah, let's get into that. And one quick point, last point on what you just said too, because it kind of feeds into this. I think a big miss that a lot of reps aren't taught, and why training oftentimes feels different than real life, to the point of what you were just saying and like being pointed, is that it doesn't take into account that we're interrupting these people's day. These are very busy working professionals. They, whether they realize it or not, actually appreciate it when you're just very pointed and concise, and you make clear who you are, why you're calling, what you want. And when you're leading off with directional, open-ended questions, and you haven't given them that context yet, a lot of them are like, I have a meeting with my boss in 3 minutes. Where are you going with this? That's what they're thinking in your head. So that's how a lot of that is what I came to realize over time, and created what I call the value statement framework, which is a repeatable, easy to implement framework that I've seen work in tech sales, in other industries. I've seen it work in SMB, mid-market, upmarket, you name the industry. These are these are repeatable cold call principles that work when you implement them the right way. So the value statement framework basically has a few components. One is the opening and delivering what I call an assumptive formality. The middle part is the actual value statement, where you answer 3 questions: who you are, why you're calling, and what you want. And then everything after that, when you've stated your intent, that your intent here is to actually set aside some time to book a meeting with them, everything after that is the objection handling piece and actually closing the meeting. But the first 2 components are by far the most important, and what's most different from the common sales enablement training is that assumptive formality in the value statement. So I can start with the assumptive formality, because remember, I preach simplicity. Less is more most times. An assumptive formality, there's no one line to deliver it, but I to this day just say, how are you, or how have you been? But the key is to deliver it with that downward inflection and signal to them that you have something to say next, and you're going to be concise and to the point, and you're not here to waste their time. So it can sound something like, hey, Eric, this is Connor Murray. Hey, Eric, this is Connor Murray calling from XYZ company. How are you? That's very different than, hey, Eric, it's Connor Murray calling from XYZ company. How are you today? How you doing today? Something like that. You're basically delivering the same thing, but I get cold calls. There's people who think, it's kind of funny sometimes, they think I'm like a decision maker at the company I work at, and they might be calling about like a CRM system or something. And I'll have a meeting in 2 minutes that I've been preparing for the last half hour. Or I'll give you another example where it was a financial services rep, this exact scenario. I had a demo in like 2 minutes. I've been preparing for an hour. It's 2 minutes before the demo. I get a call. I think it's like a different customer or something. So I wanted to quickly answer it. And it's like, hey, Connor, this is Brian calling from Northwestern Mutual. How you doing today? And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, get to the point. Like, I have a meeting in 2 minutes. And I feel for these people, because I'm like, I'm in the trenches with them every day. But in my head, I'm like, you got to get to the point. Like, just the way he delivered that, how are you? I was already like, you've lost me, because I need to get off the phone in the next 90 seconds, regardless of pretty much what you have to say to me. So the goal with the assumptive formality, literally in your head, the way you practice it is how, if I needed to get a formality from a person, picture a call you're making that's not a cold call, like you're just calling a peer or something related, not related to work. How do I get a formality from the person? You generally say, how are you? Have you been? How you doing? Something like that, downward inflection. I don't like the permission-based openers. Hey, do you have 27 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling? And then you can decide. If you can deliver it confidently, sure, it can actually work as an assumptive formality. But what I've found is most people deliver it with that upward inflection, and it creates what I call variance. It creates opportunities for the prospect to lead you off the value statement framework. So it's things like, yeah, do you have 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling? Did I catch you at a bad time? Or like confirming their name. Hi, am I speaking with Connor Murray? Hey, am I speaking with Eric Finch, the CFO at blank? You don't want, all of that creates opportunities for variance. So you're going to learn whether it's the right person anyway. You're going to learn if they have time to speak now anyway. They'll hang up on you if you don't. So there's no sense in wasting time or risking creating variance by playing those games. I teach new reps to just say, how are you? How have you been? How you doing? Say it in a way that you're looking for a formality. And most of the responses I get are along the lines of, good, how are you? Some of them might be confused. Some of them might say, good, how are you? Who is this? Or what is this regarding? And then whatever they say, the next line is, yeah, good, thanks for asking. Or good, yeah, this is Connor Murray from XYZ company. I'm just reaching out because, or the reason I'm calling is, and that's when I start to get into that value statement, the three questions, who I am, why I'm calling them, and what I want, which I can get into in a second here, but curious your thoughts on just the opening piece, because I know I went off on a lot there, but just to simplify it, it's literally to say, how are you? It's just to say it with a downward inflection so that you just get a formality from the person and then you immediately take control from there.
Yeah, I agree, obviously. And I think like this highlights, I think you did a really good job laying out in a different way how a lot of the modern training falls apart, because it doesn't take into account the fact that people are busy. They're naturally skeptical to a cold call. And like, I think everyone preaches, like they might use the term like assumptive formality, but it's not the end-to-end picture with the downward inflection, the ability to go right into selling time and what we'll get into beyond just the initial response. Like, I think a lot of the training does gear you up to say, hey, the sooner you get the prospect talking, the better, and like all of these different things. But again, just because they're talking to you, again, in your example of like the Northwestern Mutual thing, it's like if they had come in with a very assertive tone, you know, the downward inflection, they had started the call and said, and even have you say something like, I'm busy. It's like, hey, that's actually, appreciate you letting me know. That's why I'm calling. We'll get into this portion of your call now. But that's where the training falls apart. It's like, okay, so you got them to respond and say, hey, they're busy. Now let's go to our overcoming objections section, which is like, I'm not busy. It's like, no, you don't know why they're busy. So this is kind of like your one shot to get in front of them and like pitch them why you're calling, which I know we'll get into, and feel free to take it from there. Yeah.
And I don't even want to give them a chance to say they're busy. And here's a key distinction I have with a lot of the common sales enablement training. I don't want them doing any talking in the beginning. This is probably what I think is what I would consider one of my hotter takes is the first 30 to 45 seconds of the call. I want to be doing all of the talking. I think the burden of proof is on us to deliver value and convince them that we're not yet another cold caller wasting their time and sounding different by being pointed, taking control of the call generally, and then telling them who you are, why you're calling, what you want. Generally, in most cold calls I make that have been successful and the way I've seen reps be successful, the literal only thing the prospect has said after 45 seconds into the call is something like, good, how are you? It's that formality. Because then from there, I'm not going to give them, I'm going to answer all of the questions they were going to ask anyway. Where are you calling from? What do you guys do? How is this relevant? I'm going to tell them, here's who I am, why I'm calling, and the purpose for my call. And then after I deliver that, it's up to them. Sometimes they'll hang up on you. Sure. But a lot of times they'll give you objections. Well, sometimes they say yes, which we'll get to. Other times they give you objections, but now you're coming from a stronger frame because they know the purpose of your call. You've delivered a lot of value, not only with what you said being relevant and targeted and specific to them, but the way you've delivered it too. They say tonality is 90% of success on your cold calls. I don't agree with every sales expression out there. That one is true. So part of the value statement is how concise you sound. Do you sound confident, assumptive, like you've been here and done this before? Do you sound natural or do you sound salesy? A lot of that comes with practice. So I preach, take control, limit variance, get the assumptive formality, and then go into answering who you are, why you're calling, what you want. The who you are is very simple. And part of what goes into this in what we cover in cold call mastery is how you go about building your lists so that you have lists of people that have what I refer to as having homogeneous characteristics. So they either all have the same job title, they work in the same industry, they work in the same department or geography, whatever those key buying triggers for you are, they have some combination of those characteristics. So it could be CFOs in insurance, and you have a list of 50 or 100, however many people in your territory that are CFOs in insurance, VPs of HR in insurance, VPs of HR in banking, whatever your key titles are, make them for your top industries or do it by department, like finance personas in banking, finance personas in insurance or retail, whatever it is, because now when you deliver this who, why, what, you can make it targeted and repeatable in a way that's going to sound very specific to that title. So the who you are, if you were calling a CFO in banking, you could say you're part of the banking applications team or whatever you sell. I'm part of the back office banking applications team that focuses on financial processes. That's going to sound relevant to a CFO, but if you were calling HR people, you could say I'm part of the HRIS banking application team. Just little tweaks like that that can increase your odds of you sounding relevant and them thinking you're worth spending more time with by even a fraction of a little bit of a percent. That can make a big difference at scale. But if you had just kept it as I'm part of the cloud applications team at that company, maybe that doesn't sound as relevant to them and you sound like every other rep. So the who you are is pretty simple. I'm part of the back office, whatever you sell. I'm part of the back office financial applications team responsible for supporting blank. That's all why needs to be. You can just try and make it more targeted based on, their title, or I'm part of the strategic retail team if you're calling into the retail industry or something. But that's all it is, part of the back office financial applications team. And I'm reaching out because we work on priorities related to, this is the why you're calling, where you basically answer two questions. What priorities and challenges do you solve that are relevant to them? And how do you solve them? So using the CFO example, reaching out because we work on priorities related to, and then now you're going to name finance priorities, strategic planning, budget forecasting, scenario modeling, usually by working with customers or usually by working with clients to automate a lot of those monthly financial reports, reduce the amount of manual spreadsheets, and get everyone in your department onto a common system and working off the same source of truth, something like that. You can tweak these and make these better, but you could pretty much say that to just about any finance person and it's going to sound relevant to them. Now you can take it a layer deeper, and in insurance, you could talk about, we work on priorities related to insurance specific priorities like claims automation, risk assessment, line of business profitability analysis, things are important to that specific vertical, where to a bank, you could talk about, modernizing banking application architectures and interbank loan processes or something that's specific to that industry. But so that's why the value statements, it's not like the exact thing to say every single time. It's more this framework of take control at the opening, limit variance, then get right into why you're calling, which is what priorities you work on that are relevant to them, how you solve them briefly, and then stating what you want, which is time on their calendar. And I know I kind of called you out of the blue here, so I was actually more looking to set some time later this week just to get you introduced and aligned to my team going forward. How's your calendar look on Wednesday or Thursday? And it's something now, that's something you have to do. Like, when the prospect says hello, that's your goal. Get the assumptive formality and deliver the relevant value statement to whatever persona that you're calling. And I've found this SDRs get off to way stronger starts to their cold calls and proactively avoid a lot of objections they otherwise would have faced, like those defensive tones. Where'd you say you were calling? So why are you calling me? Things like that. I want to get all of that out before they ask me a single question.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think I know we've seen people drastically turn it around literally from the first call they implemented that. And that's kind of my question too, is I think we've covered this end to end and it's a lot of incredible information. How do I, as someone watching this video, actually take this today? Do you recommend, as an example, like rewatching some portions of this video and actually writing out my own script one time? Do you leverage, as an example, like once you have a script that's working for CFOs, do you throw that into ChatGPT and say, hey, I'm calling, CMOs or marketing personas and that are typically focused on this, like create a new script for that? Like, how do you get it right the first time and kind of put in that upfront work? And then is there any way you can kind of scale that and leverage that over time?
Yeah, start with your top 3 to 5 personas. Like if you had the ideal prospect where you saw them, for me in the past, it's been a VP of FP&A. That's Vice President of Financial Planning and Analysis. That's the type of prospect where it's like, I salivate if I see a VP of FP&A that hasn't been contacted in a while. I just know they're good to go after. So whatever those are for you, the ones that make you salivate, start with the top 3 to 5. And when you're delivering these, ideally, they're about 30 seconds in length. It's okay to be a little shorter. It's okay to be a little longer, but that's where you want to start. So yeah, you can rewatch. The assumptive formality is pretty self-explanatory, and then try a 2 to 3 sentence why statement that your contact, like why you're reaching out to them specifically, where you answer those questions. What priorities and challenges do you work on that are relevant to them? Name 2 or 3, and then how you solve them for customers. Name 2 or 3 ways, and then practice delivering it. If it takes you about 30 seconds to deliver, you know you're in the sweet spot. And then, yeah, you'll see, I literally, when I build these out, I put parentheses around the priorities and challenges I solve and how I solve them. And I keep that framework the same. And then for the next ICP, I basically just keep everything about the template the same and just replace what's in the parentheses. So instead of saying I'm part of the banking applications team, I say I'm part of the insurance applications team. And I replace the banking priorities that I said I worked on with insurance related priorities that I worked on. Even though it's the same solution I might be selling, I'm just positioning it a little bit differently. So a lot of the work that goes into that comes well before you actually make a cold call. It comes in that process I call coiling the spring, where you're using tools to filter leads by key characteristics, by job title, department, industry, market segment, whatever it is, adding them to list. So, and ideally doing this so that you have enough lists that you're not going to run out for months. If you're doing it the right way, this shouldn't be a daily activity that you need to do for yourself. Like, oh, wake up, I got to build a list today, figure out who to contact. You do all of this up front. You build the list first, then you build the scripts or value statements that are associated and targeted for each of those lists. So then when you wake up, you physically have your list ready, your script, you just pull the relevant template or script, whatever you're using, and you don't have to think in between each cold call. Because if you make a script targeted for CFOs and insurance, you can be pretty confident that every CFO in insurance, it's going to be a pretty targeted script for them, and you don't need to pull up their LinkedIn or go on their company website or all of that in between every cold call.
No, that's awesome, man. And yeah, I would definitely encourage anyone, like the best way to make value of this video is to, like, quite literally, if you need to jump back with the timestamps and kind of go over those things again, definitely do that, but actually pause and write it down. I can't tell you how many times, and it's what we alluded to even at the beginning of this video. I've listened to a lot of stuff like this, and it's good, right? Like, even if you're casually listening to this at the gym or driving or whatever it might be, maybe there's value, but actually implementing it, and like, I hope this gives enough meat on the bone. Maybe if there's anything you feel like you haven't mentioned, Connor, or other tactics and advice you would give to others before we sign off. Yeah, I think that's my call to action, at least, is like, actually pause, actually write this down, actually implement this like as soon as possible to see if it sticks.
Pause. And yeah, for those of you familiar with my channel, I'm sure you know I have much more in-depth videos specifically breaking down the value statement framework. If you're new here, yeah, pause and watch this, but you can also go check out those videos where I break down and give more concrete examples of different value statements and actually write out the framework itself. And then that's what we made Cold Call Mastery about too, was actually helping people implement this stuff, getting live feedback, things like that.
I was going to say, for those of you that aren't aware, you know, I run tech sales with higher levels. That's a YouTube channel in this space as well. Connor's officially a part of the team. And just for reference, like, we try and give as much free value as we possibly can. Like, nothing frustrates us more as sellers ourselves. I have paid for trainings and all of these different things, and there's nothing more frustrating than someone who makes like 5 posts and is immediately trying to shit post something. However, what we've seen over time is, like, collectively, we have millions of views on our channels. We get comments all the time. And even though we're giving a lot of this stuff out on YouTube, people are still looking for direct coaching. People are still looking for super in-depth guides. And that's exactly why we created Cold Call Mastery as another offering at higherlevels.com. I just want to restate, like, all of these things, you can take this and implement today. But if you're looking for an end-to-end framework in terms of not just the script, but how to actually plan your territory, how to generate lead lists that are relevant to your persona, these segments, all of these things Connor talked about end to end. We created that. And also once a week, there's going to be live calls with Connor directly and the higher levels team. You can message us there. Like I said, you can join a live call, ask him any questions. We can develop scripts there specifically for you, review your calls, all of those different things. Sorry for the long-winded pitch here at the very end, but just calling out for those of you that do want live coaching. Like, we've just gotten to this point where we actually did one-on-one coaching with Calendly and all that. And we had so many people book. It was like, this is unsustainable. And also a lot of people didn't have access to us that otherwise wanted it. So this is the best way to address that. And yeah, if nothing else, I don't know. Did I anything else to pitch on?
Well, the only other thing I'd say is, like you said, we had a lot of people reaching out, and I just remember still vividly how I felt trying to learn cold calling, being so frustrated, trying all of the top YouTube videos and all of that. And I basically created this as an exercise. Like, if I knew my brain was going to get scrubbed a month or 2 months from now, and I had to leave something for myself to relearn and quickly get competent at cold calling again as efficiently and quickly as possible, I wanted to put this together for my old self and for the situation I know a lot of you are probably in. So love coaching and working with all of you, and excited. Hope to see you all in the community. But yeah, Eric, thanks for joining the channel and helping facilitate this conversation today too.
Yeah, of course, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, everybody. And yeah, have a good one.
See you guys.